While the West argues, the East is quietly redrawing the map, and no one's telling you the full story. At Rise of East, we connect the dots the mainstream ignores. From China's currency strategy to BRICS reshaping global trade to the erosion of American dominance, this is where truth meets power. Now let's talk about the China-EU summit, because it was a disaster. The meeting ended early, and the only agreement they reached was a vague statement on climate change. That tells you everything. The real issue was trade, and Europe is clearly losing its grip. Caught between China's industrial machine and the fallout of cutting off Russian energy, the EU's options are vanishing. While Europe sacrificed cheap Russian commodities, China is quietly buying up everything: oil, gas, raw materials, at steep discounts. Russia is now selling to China at 20 to 30% off, and it's accelerating. Starting in 2027, Russia will pump 10 billion cubic meters of gas to China from Sakhalin Island, on top of the 40 billion already flowing through the Power of Siberia pipeline. What does this mean? Chinese industries now enjoy cheap energy, cheap raw materials, and a massive trade advantage. Europe, once competitive, has priced itself out of the market. And the EU leadership is doubling down on failure. Ursula von der Leyen keeps blaming trade imbalances and demanding China offer solutions. But what does that even mean? Should China import overpriced European goods out of pity? That's not how global trade works. The optics were clear. China didn't take this summit seriously. They packed the entire EU delegation onto one bus. No red carpet, no fanfare. Compare that to the royal receptions Saudi or Russian leaders get. China's message was clear: Europe is no longer a priority. And the numbers prove it. The EU-China trade deficit is exploding. It nearly hit $400 billion 3 years ago. In just the first half of 2025, it's already passed $170 billion. Europe depends on China for rare earths, electronics, and industrial components. Without them, manufacturing halts. But the EU has no plan, just ideology. Meanwhile, China is playing smart. Foreign direct investment into Europe hit $10 billion in 2024, up 47%. But Germany, France, and the UK saw less of it. Instead, China is investing in Hungary, an EU member that still buys Russian energy. For Beijing, that's the perfect setup: cheap production and easy access to EU markets. Back in the US, a different crisis is brewing, on American farms. Thanks to the ongoing tariff war, input costs are soaring. Equipment is expensive, exports are shrinking, and bankruptcies are at a 5-year high. In the first half of 2025, small farm bankruptcies hit 173, double the number from 2023. Why? Because China isn't buying. Trump's trade war pushed Beijing toward BRICS suppliers like Brazil for soybeans and pork. US farmers lost a top customer. The response? Subsidies. Over $20 billion a year to prop up the agriculture sector. But that's not sustainable, and Trump now faces a brutal choice: keep writing checks or watch farms collapse. Then there's the currency trap. Trump wants to boost exports by weakening the dollar, but that comes with massive consequences. Over 50% of US imports are intermediate goods: steel, electronics, components needed for manufacturing. A weaker dollar raises their cost, making US production even more expensive. To offset tariffs and remain competitive, the dollar would need to fall 20 to 30%. That would spike input costs and trigger inflation, again. Meanwhile, global central banks are already moving away from the dollar. Gold reserves are rising fast, and demand for US treasuries is falling. This isn't just a farm crisis or a trade issue, it's systemic. Europe's industry is eroding, the US is bleeding competitiveness. And China is playing the long game, with cheap energy, growing markets, and surplus capital. The next global chapter isn't being written in Washington or Brussels. It's being written in the East. This is True State Report. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.